Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, July 7th, 2025, and our friend Ambassador Chas Freeman is back with us. Welcome back, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you, Nima.
We were supposed to talk about today's topic on Friday, and but something happened and we couldn't do it. By the way,
A lot of things happened.
exactly.
I got hacked. I had money taken out of my bank account. I had to buy a new computer. It was delivered late. It was delivered, and then we had a big storm, and the power and internet went off. But anyway, I got through the week, and here we are.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to start with because the importance of the 4th of July is in the American history is something nobody can ignore, nobody can undermine. And I think it's good to you mentioned the importance of July 4th for Americans and what does that mean for the American society today. Do you want to give us your take on?
Yes, I think, well, first of all, on July 4th, I was in Bristol, Rhode Island, which is my family home. And Bristol has the longest running continuous 4th of July parade. It's been going for almost 240 years. And it took place despite the bad weather. And it does make you reflect about what the 4th of July meant. It was not just the independence of British colonies in North America. It was a revolutionary announcement of a country founded on an idea of equality of opportunity, of a constitutional rule of law, and that for much of our history in the United States has been what we've been all about domestically. I think at the end of the 19th century, we embraced imperialism, and imperialism is really not compatible with the genius of our Constitution, which focuses on civil liberties. The Constitution contains the Bill of Rights, 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights, and these were revolutionary, and they have been revolutionary ever since. But now they're all being turned back. The Constitution is being ignored. The rule of law is being defiled. The Bill of Rights is progressively being undone. The First Amendment, for example, guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble and petition the government to change its policies, and separation of church and state. And all of these are under attack in the United States. Freedom of speech is subject to censorship, often now on behalf of a foreign country, Israel, if it involves the Palestinian issue. And freedom of the press, well, the president throws the press out of the White House and nobody does anything about it. And the press is actually prosecuted for doing investigative journalism. The right to assemble and petition for a change in policy, well, tell that to the students at Columbia University or Harvard University. And separation of church and state. We have a judiciary that is almost entirely Catholic, and which has enforced the Catholic ban on birth control and abortions. So this is not the secular state that we grew up in. And we have a situation in which if you question what is happening, let's say you Nima, you might someday want to come to the United States, but if you have been critical of Donald Trump, or if it said something ideological that the American state objects to, you won't get a visa. So we have a kind of lèse majesté in Portuguese, I guess, idea that if you criticize the king, you are violating the law and should be subjected to punishment. So there are a lot of things going on, but I would say sum it all up by saying that the United States, for its entire history, prided itself on being an idea rather than a country defined by ethnicity, religion, language, and so forth. I think it's very significant in this context that suddenly we've decided we need an official language, English. We never had an official language. Of course, Americans speak English, but nobody told them that there was a law. It was not illegal to speak something else. And so the final point here is, again, to the 4th of July. The 4th of July is every country needs a myth of its origin, a set of ideas that it professes. So in the United States, this was the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it was the idea that America was not born perfect. It had terrible sins like slavery, for example. It did not recognize the rights of women. But there was a sense that over time, Americans would improve ourselves. We would aspire to be better. I think that's gone. And we don't even agree about what our history is anymore. Was America built by individuals laboring and adventuring on their own, or was it built by slave labor? What was the answer? What's the answer? We don't agree anymore. So we've lost the unifying element of our society, and we're deeply, deeply polarized. Right and left hardly talk to each other, and families are split, much as the Civil War splits families. So there was a lot to reflect on July 4th, and much of it not good.
Yeah. You mentioned some points about my first question that I'm going to ask you, that how has the shift towards xenophobia and exclusion undermined the foundational identity of the United States as an open, idea-based nation?
Well, I think we've certainly lost much of our appeal internationally. We used to be a place that people not only wanted to visit, but wanted to live in. I think most people now are afraid to come to the United States because of what they may encounter at the border or once they're here. And so we're a place that isn't very nice to live in anymore, and that fewer and fewer people want to come to. And the implications of this run very broadly, because a great deal of our influence internationally came from the fact that people admired our society. They thought it was open. They thought it was on a course of self-improvement. And now there's no effort to be open. There's no effort at self-improvement. And I mentioned a lot of the factors that go into this in terms of our relations with foreigners. But our foreign policy essentially now consists of bullying. Our friends, our allies, our foes are all subjected to. You just had threats of huge tariffs put on, 25% tariffs put on Japan and the Republic of Korea, South Korea. Two of our most reliable friends internationally, which we're committed to protect. We're actually now damaging them in serious ways. So I think a lot of this is diminishing not only our influence abroad, but our self-regard, our self-confidence.
In what ways has the dysfunction and politicization of government institutions eroded the constitutional principles that once safeguarded American democracy?
Well, a lot of what America was about was equality of opportunity. But now we have a situation in which we have an entrenched plutocracy, and social mobility is very low in the United States now. If you're born poor, you're very likely to stay poor. In fact, European countries have higher rates of social mobility in many cases now than we do. And our ancestors, those of us who came from Europe, because of course we're a country with indigenous people, with African people, with Asians, with people from everywhere, as well as from Europe. But we have a class system that is in the process of being imposed. And we have a very ideological government that favors the rich and is trying to transfer wealth from the poor to the rich. That's what the one big beautiful bill just did. And all three branches of our government, the Congress, which basically has put loyalty to Donald Trump ahead of its loyalty to the Constitution now, the Supreme Court, which is politically delegitimized because it takes very political stands, and the executive branch, the president, doesn't pay any attention. He has utter contempt for the Congress and the courts. So we see ourselves basically fouling our own nest, and we're rejecting the basic principles that made us great. And I think principle among these is the idea that that outcomes, what happened, was justified by whether the process that produced it was fair. This is the idea of due process. So if you have an election and the election is fair and you don't like the result, you have to accept the result because the process was fair. This was always our idea. And the same with the courts. You know, the idea of the courts is to quell controversies, to put an end to disputes. And it does that by having a fair hearing of the facts and determining the law and making a decision. You have to accept that. But all this has gone by the boards. We saw on January 6, 2021, that there's a large part of the population that no longer accepts the results of elections. We now have an executive branch that is not enforcing the law, but is trying to use it to punish people that they don't like. And basically, we have a government that claims to be against the so-called deep state, but I think they're really equating the Constitution with the deep state. They're trying to get rid of it. And we do have an emerging police state, as the example of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service is proving. So this is a constitutional collapse in the process.
Do you think that this has happened?
Sorry.
No problem.
That's as
Ambassador,
I mentioned to you, my younger brother is apparently dying, and I think that was one of my grandsons trying to talk to me about that, which I will do later. Anyway, sorry about that.
the process that you mentioned, Ambassador, is something that has happened during a long time.
Oh,
How
yes.
did it happen? Because many people are curious about what was the initial of what was the starting point of what has happened. As you've been mentioning about how the civil liberties and the rise of a surveillance and police state, as you mentioned, how it happened during
Well, I
years.
think it
It's all
happened.
about the foreign policy of one party, two parties, a system that brings that to the ground.
Well, of course, I approve of the comment by Julius Nyerere, the president of Tanzania, which was a one-party state. And he said the United States also has a one-party, but because they're Americans, they very extravagantly have two of them. But it's basically one party. So you have to look. This has been going on for quite a while. I think many in the United States on the right would argue that disrespect for the Constitution began in the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt, who, among other things, tried to pack the Supreme Court with his followers because it was obstructing his program. I think everyone would agree that the war power, that is the default of the Congress on its unique authority to authorize wars, that started with President Truman when he went into Korea to defend South Korea against North Korea without asking Congress for a declaration of war. And certainly we saw that precedent expanded in the Vietnam War. And since then, it's become the norm. So obviously, wars greatly augment the power of the executive, and in any circumstance. So that's that. And then there's 9/11. An attack on the United States, which was a reprisal by Islamist forces for American attacks on them, and a lot of dead Muslims in the Middle East understood that, but we didn't. In any event, our response was to curtail many of our civil liberties. So, we got into the strange position of damaging our civil liberties in order to defend them, and that process has proceeded. But I think, generally speaking, there's been a growing sense in all democracies, not just the United States, even in and I say all democracies, I include those on your continent of South America, but as well as Europe and Asia, that the politicians don't respect the will of the people. They respect money. They're corrupt. Their favor can be bought. They listen to special interests. They don't think about the national interest. In other words, there's a gap between elites and the mass that is wider and wider, and that means greater and greater dissatisfaction and disgruntlement and so forth. And so you get someone, you've had this in Brazil, I think, and we have it in the United States. You get someone who is a very gifted manipulator of public opinion, but totally unscrupulous, willing to do anything in his own interest and that of his followers. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Donald Trump, the Bolsonaro of the North, I think. You get a demagogue, someone who aspires to despotism and is able to carry it out. And this, of course, should be no surprise to political theorists. Benjamin Franklin famously, at the end of the Philadelphia conference that produced the Constitution, was asked by a woman, "What have you given us?" And he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." But actually, in the chamber, in the record of the proceedings, he's much more pessimistic. He says, all governments end in despotism, and this is likely to be no exception. And the question is, how long can you sustain a republic? And we clearly seem to be coming toward the end of the period when we can sustain it.
Do you think that Donald Trump and his administration is going to accelerate the process, or is going to influence people and impact people's life the way that would somehow accelerate the process of what's going on?
Oh, he's very definitely an accelerant of the process. He's carrying out a government by executive order. This is, he just issues directions rather than following any orderly process of policy development or the rule of law or deferring to Congress or looking for legislation. And as I mentioned, you have the Congress basically behaving as like a loyal cult, not an independent body that debates and discusses policy and makes its own decisions. And the impact of this is considerable. I mean, obviously the impact of tariffs, erratic tariffs on the allies, friends, partners, and even the enemies or foes of the United States is huge. This is destabilizing the global economy. But basically, the political volatility, the whole business of being unable to predict from one moment to the next what the policies will be, because one man is making them and with no prior consultation with anyone. And this basically makes investment decisions almost impossible. And so it risks derailing the economy. And I think we're beginning to see this. You know, the worst examples in some ways to me, given the fact that the United States was once a beacon of civil liberties, is that we're actually building gulags overseas. We are actually building a network of extreme incarceration facilities. And we are filling them with arbitrary and capricious deportation of foreigners in the United States to the point where citizens are beginning to become afraid. And the Trump administration is actually examining how to how to invalidate the naturalization of foreigners who became American citizens. So this is a serious degeneration of our system, and it has taken place over time. It's not something that Mr. Trump did entirely by himself, but he has certainly speeded up the whole process.
How can we compare the United States today and the United States that was before? It was the tradition of the United States that you mentioned that has changed during the years, but is that comparable to what's going on in China? Has China learned something from the United States that the United States is not experiencing it anymore?
Oh, I think the Chinese have learned a great deal from the United States. I can't imagine modern China without an open embrace by the United States after the opening to China by Richard Nixon. Basically, the United States didn't intend to change China, but we did in every single respect. I mean, literally millions of Chinese have studied in the United States and gone home with an exposure to Western society that has influenced policy and behavior. China, which was a rigid, top-down economy, very decentralized to be sure, but still dirigiste, to use the French word, directed with a plan, Soviet style, is now got a very vigorous capitalist economy. It's regulated by the state. The state is committed to socialism, meaning fair distribution of income and opportunity to people. No, I think the Chinese learned a great deal. The sad thing is that in the United States, we seem to have forgotten what made us great. And here I would say also there's another thing, and that is the United States was built in large measure by industrial planning. We had industrial policies. That's how the railroads were built. It's how aviation took off. It's great U.S. laboratories supported by the government invented all kinds of things like the transistor, the diode, and you know, give you an example. Everybody's forgotten that the U.S. Postal Service financed early aviation by issuing an airmail stamp when there were no planes to fly the mail. And people then created airplanes to carry the mail and so forth. So what China learned from us, we need to relearn, I think. We need to relearn. And, you know, and I would say this is really, what we're doing is really very tragic, not only for ourselves, because it will impoverish us It will reduce the vigor of our economy. It will reduce our innovation. But the protectionism and the unpredictable unilateralism that we've adopted is forcing other countries to look for alternative markets and turn away from us. So they don't want to invest in the United States if there's no rule of law. They don't want to tie their economy to us if they can't be sure that the next day a tariff will be put on them for some extraneous reason, nothing to do with economics. Same thing, our sabotage of the World Trade Organization has led other countries to explore sub-global alternatives for trade liberalization and dispute resolution. In this regard, I think so far the BRICS meeting in Rio de Janeiro is quite disappointing. It's complaining a lot about what the United States is doing, as I am, but I don't see it coming up with any program to alleviate this or correct it. And what is the BRICS going to do? I mean, the BRICS could create new institutions, new openings for trade and investment, new rules. That would be useful, but instead it seems to be concentrating on complaining rather than acting. Anyway, as if what I've been describing is weren't bad enough, the United States has actually gone farther and put bans on investment from specific countries like China. In some of our states, Texas, for example, have passed laws banning Chinese citizens from owning property. This is not unique to China, of course. You may remember that some years ago, the United Arab Emirates tried to buy some American ports and was prevented from doing that by political interference with the investment process. This risks making the United States uninvestable for the very places, Gulf Arabs, China, that have the most capital, and encourages them to put their capital somewhere else. Might be good for Brazil, I guess. So I guess the bottom line here is that we have to relearn what we once knew, and what we're doing is destroying globalization for us, but it's going on, not very effectively, judging by the results in Rio. It's still going on elsewhere. So we're basically isolating ourselves, in my view.
Ambassador, something maybe I want to ask a question, maybe it would be out of the concept of what we were talking about, but I talked many times with two economists, Michael Hudson and Richard Wolff. And what Michael Hudson said, and it comes to my mind every time I'm thinking about the economy of any country, it's the future is socialism or barbarism. You have to, Michael Hudson pictures the situation for the future. But when it comes to China, socialism with the Chinese characteristics, is that going to be defined? In the United States, we know these companies, these somehow oligarchs. They're talking about Russian oligarchs, but these oligarchs, big tech, those people who are running the show behind the scene, deciding about everything. How is that going to be? How we can have a United States that serves, that somehow embraces all these differences within the society, with having these people behind the scene running the show? Is that going to be something, some sort of socialism, a combination of socialism and capitalism together? How do you find it for the future of the United States?
I don't know where the United States is going on this. The word socialism has been thoroughly discredited in the American political vocabulary. This is something that happened over a long period. The socialist candidate for president, Eugene Debs, was jailed back in 1920, I think, when he ran for president. So the wealthy people in the United States who have been able to control politics and influence political thought are very anti-socialist, but they don't really know what socialism is. And I think the case of China is one in point. Deng Xiaoping said, "To get rich is glorious," and he said, some people need to get rich first, and then everyone will get rich later." And this was his idea. And I think the Chinese actually are quite serious about socialism in the sense of fair socioeconomic distributions of wealth and income and benefits. And the United States is going in the other direction. Not only we are, instead of distributing wealth from the wealthy to the poor, we are sucking the wealth out of the poor and giving it to the wealthy. And you're right, we have oligarchs, plutocrats, if you will, who dominate our political life. They don't all agree with each other. We now see Elon Musk saying very nasty things about Donald Trump and vice versa, and there seems to be a bit of a war in Silicon Valley between different wealthy people. But the fact is that our politics are skewed very much toward influenced by the wealthy rather than ordinary people. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that ordinary people have the sense that they don't matter to the people who run the country, and that they're not listened to, and that their interests are not taken into account. And so I don't know where the United States is going to go. And I'm not sure about where China's going to go. But I see an impulse in China to experiment with various capitalist institutions at the same time as they've not forgotten the ideal of a more fair distribution of income and opportunity in their society. Of course, they have gone through the last 5 decades have been an incredible opening for the disadvantaged in China. Social mobility there has been amazing. People have come from nowhere to multi-billion-dollar wealth overnight almost, and a great deal of innovation has happened as a result of this. I think, in the United States, we're going in the opposite direction at the moment, and I don't know whether we will reverse course or not.
Do you find that you mentioned Elon Musk, he and his differences with Donald Trump? Do you think that he's going to be able to finally have to bring a third party to the political system of the United States, or he's going to be someone like, we know that Michael Bloomberg once tried to do this, but he couldn't do it. How about the Elon Musk and the movement, this MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, and how many of these people who voted for Donald Trump may this sort of idea on the part of Elon Musk would resonate with them? Do you find it?
I think the key will be whether Elon Musk has the money, if he wants to finance a new party, to make it viable. Many would argue that the United States has been in a political period rather like that before our Civil War, which began in 1861 and lasted till 1865. And that was a period from 1850 to 1860 in which a third party, the Republican Party, successfully ran on an anti-slavery platform and took the country in a new direction, not without a lot of bloodshed, because the South didn't agree where slavery was practiced. But we're in the same sort of situation in many ways. We seem to be ripe for a third party. Our system makes it very difficult to have a third party, in part because we have gerrymandered, we have distorted the electoral districts. We have a primary system which favors the more extreme elements in each party. But it depends on what the America Party, which is what he proposes to call it, comes up with by way of a positive agenda. Just being critical of Donald Trump isn't going to get that party elected any more than it got Kamala Harris elected. So if you ask, what does Donald Trump stand for? We know what he stands for. Some of it's pretty crazy. You know, a wall to keep out Mexicans and Central Americans, tariff and trade wars, and so forth. Lots of things, and not to mention the dictatorial aspects of his presidency. What did Kamala Harris stand for? Nobody knew, and so I think Elon Musk can't create this party successfully unless he allows it to develop ideas that reflect a majority of American concerns. And it's too early to say. I don't think he's even really registered the party yet. So at the moment, this is some kind of personal vendetta. It's not a serious political effort. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, in the BRICS summit, what was one of the main issues that they've been discussing during this summit, it was the case of tariffs and how the United States is trying to impose tariffs and sanctions on other countries. How is that going to, these unilateral economic policies, weaken the US role in the global economy and international institutions?
Well, of course, we've withdrawn from many international institutions or we didn't join them. When the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was created, we boycotted it. I think we and Japan are about the only countries that did boycott it. We have sabotaged the World Trade Organization, as I mentioned. We are not engaged in any, we repudiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're not part of any of the bodies that now make trade rules for trade between countries. And, but of course the BRICS don't seem to be doing that either. So I think, this is an open question, what this means. What is clear is that the unilateral, unpredictable moves of the United States are not being effectively countered by the world. It's very interesting. Donald Trump just had to extend his deadline for tariffs and trade agreements. Why? Because there really haven't been any trade agreements. There have been a few very limited compromises, one with the United Kingdom, one with China, one with Vietnam. That's it, nothing else. And so we're drifting into trade wars with Europe and Japan and Korea and other countries. We haven't reached an agreement with India, which is another major economy on the way up. And of course, we have a terrible relationship with South Africa. So I think the rest of the world has an opportunity to forge linkages and build institutions. Pretty much, you can leave the light on in case the Americans finally want to join these, but don't count on the United States in the short term doing anything positive. And I would argue that what the BRICS and others ought to be doing is looking after themselves. Don't worry about the United States. The United States is making terrible mistakes, which will hurt us. They'll hurt everybody, but they'll hurt us more than everyone else. And that's too bad. I mean, as an American, I'm really upset about that. But if I were a Brazilian or an Indian or a Nigerian or something, I would argue, okay, let the Americans make their mistakes. We'll try to do something ourselves, among ourselves. Well, anyway, I'm not sure that's happening, which is too bad. The isolation, of course, is aggravated by what we're doing to our intellectual institutions and our universities. There's a culture war against Harvard and other universities. There's greatly reduced funding for scientific research. And this is really tragic because, again, this is another thing that the United States pioneered. Vannevar Bush, the science advisor after World War II and under President Truman, created an incredible partnership between the federal government and universities and research institutions, which led to a great deal of innovation. But we're now facing the decline of our universities, which had always been regarded as among the very best in the world. Nature magazine, which rates universities, especially for STEM, scientific, technological, engineering, and mathematical purposes, says the top 10 universities now in the world, they put Harvard as number one, but Harvard is now in trouble. They put MIT as number 10, but MIT is in trouble. And the numbers 2 through 8 are all Chinese, 2 through 9 are all Chinese. This is a great change. And I look at, there's a history here. We have a brain drain going on. That is, foreign scientists have been leaving for one reason or another, especially Chinese scientists. But even native-born scientists have been leaving because they can get funding and the freedom to do research and collaborate with others more effectively in places like China, of all places, than they can in the United States. And I remember something people have forgotten, that German was the language of science until about 1933, when the Germans started doing many of the same things the Trump administration is doing, created a brain drain, discredited their scientific institutions with Nazism, and the United States and others benefited greatly from this. But Germany has not regained. Germany's got a solid engineering tradition, as you know. I think you have a degree from Germany. But German science and technology is still very good, but it's no longer the world leader. And I wonder, is the scientific language of the world going to be Chinese or Portuguese or something other than English? Who knows?
Yeah. Ambassador, in the BRICS summit, they condemned the attacks on Iran and Russia. They didn't do it. Many people were criticizing it wasn't the language they used was not sufficient. The way that they did it was not appropriate. But after all, when you look at BRICS today and what it was before, we haven't heard a lot about BRICS before the war in Ukraine started. Since the war started in Ukraine, something has happened to BRICS because many people with tariffs, sanctions, all when everybody was watching what is happening to Russia. And Russia, it was not Libya, was not Iraq, Afghanistan. And how do you see the way that BRICS is changing its behavior? You said that they don't have solution for it, but are they learning? Is that a learning process for BRICS?
Not clear to me. I mean, there is no rule that says that you have to go to the United Nations to make rules. I mean, that's obviously the most efficient way to make rules for the entire world. But if the United Nations is paralyzed because in the 1950s, the Soviet Union paralyzed it, or now the United States paralyzes it, there's nothing to stop you from convening an ad hoc conference or an organization like BRICS and agreeing among the participants in the conference or the BRICS that you're going to follow certain rules without regard to, whatever else, what remains of the WTO or whatever. And I don't see this happening. That is a surprise. Well, maybe not a surprise, but a disappointment. And I think the case of the U.S.-Russian proxy war in Ukraine doesn't lend itself to BRICS doing much of anything. Except BRICS could strongly express support for an end to the war, and offer mediation, and perhaps offer to supply a peacekeeping force to supervise the early stage of peace settlement. In the case of Israel-Palestine, that's very different. I mean, the BRICS is in a position to impose an embargo. And some institutions associated with BRICS are doing that, or independent associations. I noticed that the International Sociological Association has expelled the Israelis on grounds that they've committed genocide and should not be part of the body. I think what we're seeing is fairly typical of committees. The BRICS is perhaps a committee. I don't know whether you have ever seen a committee make a decision. I don't think they make decisions. I think somebody has to make a decision and persuade the committee to endorse it. And there should have been a lot of preparatory work done before this meeting in Rio de Janeiro. I don't see the evidence that it was done. So anyway, I think so far the BRICS is more effective as a critic than as an actor. And maybe it will stay that way. I hope not.
How do you feel about the situation with Israelis with the case of Gaza? We've seen that these Israeli soldiers coming out, some of them had interviews on Sky News and other platforms. They were somehow describing how they feel about what is happening in Gaza. Some of them are somehow so much depressed, so much influenced by what has happened in Gaza. Some of them are supporting the policies of the Israeli government. On the other hand, we have one of the American professors, Dershowitz, supporting. He says that killing civilians is about in the way of destroying Hamas. We have to kill civilians. But these people, when it comes to the foreign policy of the United States and the situation in Gaza, why is it so difficult to understand that what's going on in Gaza is totally against anything that the United States stands for?
I don't think it's that difficult. In fact, a major part of the American population sees this. We now see a tremendous turn in opinion, particularly the Democratic Party. Very few members of that party continue to support Israel. They support the Palestinians. Independents, to a lesser extent, have also made this shift. Even the Republicans, for various reasons, are souring on Israel. Part of the Republican MAGA group are basically isolationist, or they don't believe the United States should be involved in other people's quarrels, which is a sound idea as a starting point. And they don't like the fact that the United States is subjected to Israel. And, there are people who are, like myself, who resent the fact that a foreign country is able to lead us around by the nose. We do what Israel says for many reasons, having to do with the corruption of our own politics and other factors. But there's a huge effort, of course, mounted by the Israelis very skillfully, very effectively, to silence anyone who is critical of Israel and to promote people like Professor Dershowitz, who, to my knowledge, has never disapproved of anything Israel ever did. I think, Israel could murder all the Palestinians and he'd find an excuse for it. So he's behaving like Israel's lawyer, not an independent a judge of Israeli behavior. Now, there are people in Israel, as you mentioned, who have been involved in Gaza who are very, very disturbed about what they have been involved in. There's just a story of an Israeli soldier who committed suicide in his car because he just couldn't live with what he had observed and participated in. And we see very open reporting, not in the mainstream media, but in the alternative media, demonstrating that these so-called feeding stations are basically slaughter stations. That is, they want to attract people in order to kill them, and they do. And the American mercenaries who are there are no better, apparently, than the Israeli soldiers who back them up. So this gets me to the point that, we've got another, I think, mostly farcical discussion of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas going on. Actually, this is not a ceasefire proposal from Israel to Hamas. It's a ceasefire proposal negotiated between the United States and Israel. Hamas didn't participate. Hamas has very reasonable objections to it. Israel has objections to it. For example, Israel, once again, has declined to commit to really ending the war in Gaza. It has an objective of depopulating Gaza and resettling it. That is, for the Palestinians and for Hamas, an existential life and death issue. Israel wants Hamas to surrender and Palestinians to be subjugated so they can be deported. That's their objective. Why should the Palestinians agree to that? Well, of course, there's tremendous pressure on Hamas from Palestinians who are starving to death under these and getting killed under this really macabre, evil arrangement called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That is a very Orwellian name for an institution that is aiding and abetting genocide, not helping people survive or get the food they need to eat.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Well, I'm not sure.
Great pleasure to have you on.
I'm not sure we solved any problems, but I think really, thank you for asking the questions. This is not a good time in the world. It's not a good time for the United States. And we all ought to be trying to fix this and not just sit around complaining about it. We'll see whether Elon Musk's latest invention, the America Party, is part of the answer or part of the problem.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ambassador. See you soon.
Thank you.